Beneath the fractured moon, a single snowflake traced the path of a forgotten tear, falling silent upon the frozen throne of Nocthram. Elira Vess huddled in the throng of the great square, her breath a fragile mist against the biting wind that swept down from the jagged peaks of the Ironspine Mountains. 5 years had passed since the Pack's verdict, since the Alpha's scorn had branded her unworthy, a barren Omega whose scent carried no promise of heirs or strength. They had cast her out from the hearth of Blackthorn Pack, not with blades, but with whispers, whispers that echoed like the howl of winter wolves stripping her of name and kin. Banished to the fringes, she had wandered the shadowed vales, surviving on the scraps of forest bounty and the indifferent mercy of the wild. Rejection was a slow poison, seeping into her bones, turning every step into an exile from the warmth she had once known. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and smoldering torches, their flames dancing like restless spirits along the stone walls of the citadel. Nocthram's heart, the ancient seat of the Alpha Kings, loomed above the crowd, its spires clawing at the starless sky. Snow dusted the cobblestones, crunching under the boots of the gathered shifters, alphas in fur-lined cloaks, betas with eyes sharp as flint, and the occasional Omega like her, cloaked in anonymity. The ceremony marked the anniversary of the great loss, a rite to honor the fallen queen, Elira Nocthram, whose death had shrouded the kingdom in perpetual twilight. Elira had come not for solace, but for the faint hope of alms, a coin or crust to stave off the hunger gnawing at her core. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter, the fabric worn thin from endless miles, and fingered the pendant at her throat. A simple silver chain bearing a teardrop moonstone, its pale blue glow a relic from her mother's grave. It was her only anchor, cool against her skin like the touch of forgotten moonlight. The crowd stirred as the tolling bells fell silent, their deep resonance fading into the wind's mournful sigh. From the balcony of the throne hall emerged King Arik Nocthram, his silhouette a monolith of shadowed power. Tall and broad, he moved with the deliberate grace of one who bore the weight of a crown forged in blood and ice. His hair, dark as raven wings, was streaked with silver at the temples, a mark of the grief that had aged him beyond his 35 winters. Clad in a mantle of midnight fur edged with silver thread, he carried the scepter of the moon goddess, its head a crescent moon encrusted with frost-kissed crystals. But it was his eyes that held the assembly captive, storm gray, rimmed with the red of unshed tears, reflecting the torment of a king who had lost his mate to the fever that no healer could conquer. Arik ascended the dais, the wind whipping at his cloak, carrying the faint, acrid tang of distant forges where weapons were tempered for the border wars. The rival packs of the southern tundras pressed ever closer, their alphas hungry for the weakness whispered through the passes. He raised a hand, and silence descended like a shroud. 5 years, he began, his voice a low rumble that cut through the chill like a blade. 5 years since the moon goddess called Elira to her eternal hunt. She was the light in our endless night, the warmth against the frost of duty. Her laughter echoed in these halls, her touch mended the fractures of my soul, and in her absence— He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, distant and hollow. In her absence, I have ruled with the silence she left behind. A king without his queen is but a shadow, wandering the snows of regret. Elira's heart clenched, an unwelcome ache blooming in her chest. She had heard the tales of Queen Elira, the Omega who had tamed the wild heart of the fiercest Alpha, whose bond had fortified Nocthram against invasion. From her exile, Elira had envied that union, a rarity in a world where Omegas like her were deemed disposable. The pendant at her throat warmed unexpectedly, the moonstone pulsing with a soft, ethereal light that she attributed to the torch flames nearby. She shifted in the crowd, her boots sinking into the fresh powder, and caught a gust of wind that bore the king's scent, pine and iron, laced with the deep, salty undercurrent of sorrow. It stirred something primal within her, a flicker of instinct she had long suppressed, urging her to draw closer, to offer solace she had no right to give. Arik continued, his words weaving through the air like threads of fate. "She died 5 years ago," he said, his voice cracking for the first time, raw as an open wound. The crowd murmured, a wave of shared grief rippling outward. Her eyes, blue as the glacial depths, haunt my every dawn. Her smile, a promise of spring in eternal winter. We gather not to mourn, but to remember, to vow that her legacy endures in the strength of our pack. He bowed his head, the scepter trembling in his grip, and in that moment of vulnerability, his gaze lifted, scanning the faces below as if seeking her ghost. Their eyes met across the sea of fur and frost. Ilara's breath caught, the world narrowing to the intensity of his stare. Those storm-gray depths locked onto her moonstone pendant, then rose to her face, her eyes, wide and luminous, mirroring the blue of the Queen's legend. A jolt passed between them, electric as lightning over the peaks. Her scent, wild heather and fresh snow, wafting upward on the breeze, familiar yet impossibly alive. Arik's posture stiffened, his knuckles whitening on the scepter. Who was she? Not Ilara yet. Something stirred in the recesses of his soul, a whisper from the goddess herself, pulling at the threads of destiny long unraveled. Ilara turned away, heart pounding like war drums in her ears, the pendant now burning against her skin. The wind howled louder, carrying the distant weevo of wolves, as if the mountains themselves sensed the fracture in the king's unyielding grief. In the shadow of the citadel, exile met monarchy, and the moon watched, waiting for the blood that would bind or break them. Ilara stumbled through the throng, her pulse a frantic rhythm against the cage of her ribs, as if the king's gaze had ignited a spark in the marrow of her bones. The crowd pressed in, a living tide of fur and whispers, carrying her away from the balcony like leaves in a gale. She tasted salt on her lips, tears she hadn't meant to shed, and the moonstone pendant seared hotter, its glow hidden now beneath her shawl. Pulsing like a second heart. Why him? Why now? Exile had taught her to fade into shadows, to become one with the wind's indifference, yet that storm-gray stare had pierced her veil, stirring echoes she couldn't name. The air grew thicker with the scent of damp stone and roasting meats from the feast tents. But beneath it lingered his essence, iron and pine, laced with a grief so profound it clawed at her own solitude. She slipped into a narrow alley off the square, the citadel's walls rising like frozen sentinels on either side, their surfaces etched with runes that glowed faintly under the fractured moonlight. Snowflakes swirled in eddies, catching in her hair like fragile secrets, and she leaned against the cold masonry, breath ragged. The ceremony's echoes faded, the king's voice, now a ghost in her mind, repeating those words of loss that mirrored her own unspoken wounds. 5 years for him, 5 for her, since Blackthorn's alpha had declared her barren, a vessel cracked and empty, unworthy of the pack's fire. They had not slain her outright. Omegas were too rare for such waste, but they had stripped her of everything. Home, purpose, the illusion of belonging. She had fled into the Iron Spines, where the winds whispered of forgotten queens and lunar curses, surviving on roots and the rare kindness of lone travelers. The pendant, unearthed from her mother's frozen grave, had been her sole companion, its moonstone whispering of hidden strengths she dared not believe. A shadow detached from the alley's mouth, broad and deliberate, blocking the pale light. Ilara froze, her instincts flaring, flight or fight, the Omega's eternal dance. But the figure did not advance with aggression. He moved like a wounded beast, favoring his left side, the fur of his cloak matted with fresh snow and something darker, metallic in the chill air. Blood. It carried on the breeze, mingling with his scent. Unmistakable now up close. King Arik alone, unguarded, his scepter abandoned to the ceremony's pomp. His eyes found hers in the dimness, that same electric pull from the balcony, but rawer, stripped of the throne's armor. "You," he murmured, voice a gravelly timbre that vibrated through the stone. The woman with her eyes. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as a thorn, yet curiosity bloomed alongside it, unbidden. She pressed back against the wall, the rough ice biting through her shawl. "I am no one, my king," she whispered, her voice trembling like the snow-laden branches overhead. "A shadow from the fringes. Leave me to it." But her body betrayed her. The pendant thrummed, warm as a lover's breath, and a faint scent escaped her, heather blooming under frost, alive and defiant. It drew him nearer, his nostrils flaring, a low rumble building in his chest, not threat but recognition, primal and denied. Arik halted a pace away, his frame towering yet bowed, as if the weight of his crown pressed him earthward. Up close, the lines of grief etched his face were canyons of shadow, silver threads in his hair catching the moonlight like frost on a blade. A gash marred his forearm, hidden hastily beneath his sleeve, the work of an assassin's dart during the rite. Whispers of southern rivals infiltrating the borders, testing the king's fractured resolve. He had slipped away not in pursuit, but in compulsion, drawn by that inexplicable thread to the alley's gloom. "Those eyes," he said, softer now, laced with a vulnerability that cracked his royal facade, blue as glacial fire, like hers, and this. His gaze dropped to her throat, where the shawl had slipped, revealing the moonstone's ethereal pulse. He reached out, hesitating, his calloused fingers hovering as if afraid to shatter a dream. "A mark of the goddess. Tell me your name, Omega. Before the night claims us both." Illyra's breath hitched, the air between them charged, heavy with the scent of blood and unspoken fates. Instinct screamed to run. Kings did not seek exiles without purpose, and purpose often meant chains. Yet fear tangled with a deeper curiosity, a pull toward the sorrow in his eyes, mirroring her own exiled heart. She was no queen reborn. She was Illyra Vess, broken and barren, her body a testament to rejection's cruelty. But the pendant warmed under his nearness, its light flickering like a shared secret, and for the first time in years, the cold felt less absolute. "Illyra," she said at last, the word a fragile offering. "Illyra of nowhere." He nodded, as if the name unlocked a rusted gate within him, and extended his uninjured hand, not in command, but invitation. "The shadows grow long tonight, Illyra of nowhere. Walk with me. The wolves howl of traitors in the passes, and I cannot bear another ghost alone." The wind rose, carrying distant weavos that echoed like warnings, and she saw it then, the curse of his kingship, the guilt that marked him as surely as the blood on his sleeve. Connection sparked, instinctive and terrifying, born not of desire, but of two souls adrift in the same storm. She placed her hand in his, cool against his fevered skin, and they moved deeper into the alley's embrace, the moonstone glowing brighter, a beacon in the gathering dark. As they vanished into the labyrinth of Nocthrum's underbelly, the first flakes of a heavier snow began to fall, veiling their steps in white silence. Fear whispered of peril, curiosity of possibility, and the night unfolded its lunar secrets, binding exile to throne in threads of blood and frost. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The labyrinth of Nocthrum's underbelly swallowed them whole, its narrow passages twisting like the veins of some ancient, frost-veined beast. Elira's hand trembled in Aric's grasp, not from the cold that clawed at her exposed skin, but from the heat of his touch, a forge's glow against the perpetual winter of her exile. The moonstone pendant swung between them, a silent pendulum marking each step, its inner light pulsing in rhythm with their shared breath, casting fleeting azure shadows on the slick stone walls. Snow sifted down from unseen crevices above, dusting their shoulders like the ash of forgotten pyres, and the air grew heavy with the metallic bite of blood from his wound, mingling with the earthy tang of wet earth and distant hearth smoke. Aric led her onward, his stride measured yet urgent, the king's mantle trailing behind like a wounded wing. He did not speak of the gash on his arm, though she could see the dark stain spreading beneath the fabric, a slow seep that spoke of poison-tipped barbs from the southern assassins who had dared the citadel's wards. Whispers of betrayal had long haunted his court, rival alphas from the tundra clans, sensing the fracture in Nocthrum's spine since Ilara's death, probing for weakness like wolves at a dying deer's flank. Tonight's right had been their boldest strike, a dart loosed from the crowd's edge, grazing him as he stood exposed in grief. He had fled the balcony, not just for her, but to evade the guards' frantic search, to confront this pull before duty dragged him back into the fray. They emerged into a forgotten courtyard, ringed by crumbling arches that once held the glow of lunar vigils, now choked with ivy frozen into brittle lace. A low growl rumbled from the shadows beyond, a scout from the infiltrators, his eyes gleaming yellow in the dimness. Furred form crouched low over the snow-dusted flagstones. The beast lunged, jaws snapping with the fury of border wars, driven by the scent of royal blood. Aric shoved Ilara behind him, his free hand shifting seamlessly into claws, the alpha's instinct igniting like flint on steel. He met the attacker mid-leap, their bodies colliding in a whirlwind of snarls and frost-kicked powder, fangs tearing at fur and flesh. Blood sprayed, warm and coppery, splattering Ilara's shawl as she pressed against the wall, heart thundering a war chant in her ears. Fear rooted her, but not paralysis. Exile had honed her into something sharper, a survivor who knew the wild's teeth. As Aric grappled, the wolf's claws raking his already wounded side, she scanned the gloom. A rusted iron grate lay half-buried nearby, its bars twisted from some long-ago collapse. With a surge of desperation, she lunged forward, wrenching it free, the metal groaning like a dying breath. The pendant flared hot against her chest, urging her on, as if the moonstone itself whispered of hidden refuges. "Here!" she hissed, her voice cutting through the melee like a blade. Aric twisted, slamming the beast against the stone with a bone-crunching thud, then rolled away, bloodied but unbowed. He seized her arm, and together they dove through the grate's jagged mouth, tumbling into the damp embrace of an underground tunnel, the iron slamming shut behind them just as the wolf's howl pierced the night, a promise of pursuit. Darkness enveloped them, thick as velvet, broken only by the faint luminescence of the moonstone, which now shone steadily, illuminating veins of quartz in the walls like captured starlight. They crawled deeper, the tunnel narrowing to a crawl space that forced their bodies close, her back brushing his chest, his ragged breaths warming the nape of her neck. The sounds above faded, paws scrabbling futilely at the grate, then retreating into the wind's wail, but the danger lingered, a specter in the silence. Aric's wound wept steadily now, the poison's burn evident in the tremor of his frame, and Ilara felt it through their proximity. The alpha's fire dimming, guilt and duty warring within him like storm clouds over the peaks. They emerged into a hidden chamber, a natural hollow beneath the citadel's roots, where bioluminescent fungi clung to the ceiling like frozen fireflies, casting a soft, ethereal glow. A trickle of water echoed from a crevice, pooling into a shallow basin that mirrored the moon's fractured face far above. Aric slumped against the wall, his cloak falling open to reveal the torn flesh, black veins spiderwebbing from the gash like ink in snow. "The tundra clans," he murmured, voice hoarse, eyes distant as if seeing battles yet to come. They smell my weakness, the void Alara left. I should have foreseen this strike, fortified the rights. A king who mourns is a king who bleeds. Alara knelt before him, her hands steady despite the quake in her soul. Rejection had taught her the anatomy of wounds, not just flesh, but spirit, and she tore a strip from her shawl, pressing it to the injury. The contact sent a shiver through them both, her Omega's touch soothing the Alpha's rage, drawing out the poison in thin, acrid beads. The moonstone dangled between her breasts, its light intensifying, bathing his skin in blue serenity, as if the goddess herself lent her mercy. "You carry too much alone," she said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of the wound with unexpected gentleness, born not of pity, but recognition. His pain echoed hers, the barren verdict that had exiled her, the queen's death that had hollowed him. Exile strips you bare, leaves you to the wolves, but surviving. It forges something unbreakable. Let me help bind this as the night binds us. Arik's gaze met hers, storm-gray depths softening, the guilt that armored him cracking under her empathy. He reached up, cupping her cheek, thumb rough against her frost-kissed skin, and in that touch, denial fractured. The connection deepened, instinctive pull weaving into something tender, a bond forged in shared peril rather than fate's whim. Her scent enveloped him, heather thawed by inner fire, easing the sorrow that had festered for 5 years, while his presence stirred in her a warmth long denied, a sense of worth beyond barren wombs. Yet resistance lingered. He was king, bound by throne and memory, she an Omega cast aside, her body a map of losses. "Why you?" he whispered, voice laced with wonder and fear. "Why does the goddess tease me with echoes?" The pendant pulsed brighter, a symbol of revelations yet unveiled, as distant howls filtered through the stone, enemies closing in. But here, in this refuge of earth and glow, empathy bloomed into quiet alliance. Alara tied the bandage, her hands lingering, and felt the first stirrings of a choice, to flee back to shadows, or to stand with this broken monarch against the storm. The air hummed with unspoken vows, the moon's light seeping through cracks above, illuminating the blood on the floor like offerings to destiny. In the heart of Nocthrum's hidden veins, 2 exiles found fragile shelter, their wounds mirroring, binding them in the fire of what might yet be redeemed. But as the howls grew nearer, the dilemma sharpened. Protection demanded trust, and trust in a world of betrayals was the sharpest blade of all. The chamber's bioluminescent hush deepened as the howls clawed closer, a chorus of feral intent threading through the stone like veins of ice. Alara knelt beside Arik, her fingers still laced with the residue of his blood. Warm, viscous, a stark crimson against her pale skin, pooling on the cavern floor like spilled wine under the moon's indifferent gaze. The moonstone pendant hung heavy between them, its azure pulse now a steady throb, syncing with the ragged cadence of his breath as if it drank from the wound she had bound. She could feel the poison's residue in the air, a bitter fog that stung her eyes. But more than that, she sensed the deeper rot within him, not the dart's venom, but the guilt that had festered since Ilara's fever claimed her, turning a king's strength into a hollow echo. Arik's hand tightened on her wrist, his grip fevered, pulling her closer into the fungi's ethereal glow. His storm-gray eyes, rimmed with pain's shadow, searched her face, not with the command of royalty, but the desperation of a soul teetering on the abyss. "The tunnels lead to the old lunar sanctum," he rasped, voice gravel over frost. "A place the goddess once blessed. If we reach it, the wards might hold against the clan's scouts, but this wound, it burns deeper than flesh." He winced, a low growl escaping his throat, the Alpha's pride warring with vulnerability. Blood seeped anew through the bandage, staining her hands, and in that moment, Ilara's exile-forged resolve cracked. She had bound physical rifts before, in the wilds, mending a traveler's gash with herbs and will. But this was no mere cut. This was a monarch's unraveling, mirrored in her own barren scars. The pendant ignited then, not with warmth, but a searing clarity, as if the moonstone had captured the full orb's fury. Light erupted from its core, flooding the chamber in a cascade of silver blue, illuminating the quartz veins like rivers of liquid night. Elara gasped, recoiling, but Arik held fast, his body arching as the glow enveloped them both. Visions assailed her, unbidden and visceral, fragments of a life not her own, flickering like torch flames in wind. A queen's laughter echoing through sun-dappled halls. Her blue eyes, Ilara's eyes, locking with a younger Arik's in a bond sealed under the full moon. Then darkness, the fever's grip, sweat-slicked sheets in the royal bedchamber, Ilara's hand slipping from his as the goddess whispered her away. But amid the grief, a spark, Ilara's soul, not extinguished but splintered, entrusted to the lunar weave, a fragment preserved in the ether, waiting for a vessel of pure rejection, one whose pain mirrored the queen's unspoken regrets. Ilara's mind reeled, the images crashing like waves on iron-spined shores. She was no queen, she was Ilara Vess, the Omega deemed empty, her womb a silent tomb, cast out for failing the pack's brutal arithmetic of heirs and might. Yet the fragment sought her, drawn by the moonstone's call, her exile's purity, a canvas for its rebirth. The light surged into Arik's wound, the black veins receding like shadows before dawn, the poison hissing out in acrid steam that curled toward the ceiling. He shuddered, a guttural moan escaping him, his free hand clutching at his chest as if to anchor the flood. "Ilara," he whispered, eyes widening in the glow, not accusation, but revelation. "It's you. Not her, but her light. The goddess. She sent you." The vision shifted, revealing more. Nocthram's fate, hanging by a thread. The Tundra clans not mere raiders, but pawns in a deeper betrayal. A traitorous beta in Arik's own council, whispering secrets to the south, exploiting the king's grief to shatter the throne. Ilara saw it unfold. Flames devouring the citadel under a blood moon. Arik fallen, his pack scattered like snow in storm. But then, a pivot. Her hand in his, the moonstone's power amplified, weaving a new bond that could rally the fractured, turn guilt to purpose. She was the key, the Pathfinder's echo, her hidden gift, not barrenness, but conduit, the ability to channel lunar essence, to heal not just bodies, but destinies, revealing truths veiled by deception. Rejection had been her forge, stripping illusions until only raw potential remained, a Omega's quiet strength to mend what Alpha's broke. Tears traced frozen paths down her cheeks, the chamber's chill amplifying their burn. "I am not her," Ilara said, her voice a thread of steel amid the fading light. Pulling her hand free, yet feeling the tether remain, invisible and insistent. The pendant dimmed to a soft ember, but the weight of it lingered, a symbol etched now in her blood-mingled palms. Fear coiled anew, not of the approaching howls, which echoed closer, paws scraping stone above, but of this mantle. To be key meant chains, to heal meant exposure, and love, if it bloomed here, was no gentle thaw, but a trial by fire and frost. Arik rose unsteadily, the wound sealed, his gaze upon her transformed, no longer the ghost seeker, but a king glimpsing redemption's edge. "You carry her fragment," he murmured, cupping her face with blood-streaked hands, his touch igniting sparks along her skin. "The goddess chose an exile to save a throne. Why you, Ilara? Because your pain. It echoes mine. Unworthy, yet unbreakable." She stepped back, the basin's water rippling at her feet, reflecting their silhouettes, two shadows merging under the moon's proxy. The gift's manifestation left her hollowed, exposed, the lunar power ebbing like a receding tide, leaving questions in its wake. Was this destiny's gift or curse? To hold a queen's soul meant eclipsing her own. To be Aric's salvation meant surrendering the freedom of shadows. The howls crescendoed, the sanctum's entrance a mere crawl away, but the true confrontation brewed within. Could she embrace this role, or would resistance preserve her fractured self? Aric extended his hand again, eyes pleading with ethical fire, the guilt that had defined him now alight with purpose. Come with me to the sanctum. Let the moon witness what we've uncovered. Empathy warred with dread in her chest, the blood on the floor a stark reminder of bonds forged in peril, and as she hesitated, the chamber trembled with the clan's approach, destiny's blade poised at their throats. In that suspended breath, Ilara realized the revelation's cruel poetry. Healing another demanded confronting her own wounds, and in Aric's gaze she saw not possession, but a mirror to her renascimento, or ruin. The moonstone warmed once more, whispering of choices yet to bleed. Comment, Luna, if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The sanctum's arched entrance yawned before them like the maw of a slumbering god, its stone lips etched with lunar sigils that flickered to life under the moonstone's lingering glow. Ilara hesitated, her bloodied hands, stained with Aric's essence, clenching at her sides, the pendant's weight a constant reminder of the revelation that had shattered her fragile exile. The air thrummed with the clan's howls, closer now, a savage symphony vibrating through the earth. But it was the internal storm that rooted her. The fragment of Ilara within her, not possession, but a luminous echo, demanding she bridge the chasm between shadow and throne. Aric's hand remained extended, his storm-gray eyes pleading with a king's restrained fire, the guilt that had hollowed him now tempered by this newfound purpose. "The past hunts us both," he said, voice low as the wind's prelude to blizzard. "Face it with me, Ilara, or let it claim what the goddess has stirred." She took his hand, the contact a spark that ignited the sigils, bathing the tunnel in silver light as they crawled toward the sanctum's heart. The space unfolded into a vast cavern, its ceiling a dome of natural crystal that channeled the moon's fractured beams into shafts of ethereal blue pooling on the altar at the center, a slab of obsidian veined with frost where ancient offerings of blood and bone lay petrified. The air was thick with the scent of sacred incense, long faded, mingled with the fresh copper of Aric's healing wound and the heather-sweet trace of her own awakening power. They rose, dust and snow shaking from their cloaks, and for a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the distant drip of meltwater and the pounding of her heart, echoing the ethical precipice they teetered upon. But peace was fleeting. The entrance shuddered, stone grinding as shadows erupted into the light. 3 Tundra clan warriors, hulking forms clad in bleached hides and iron collars etched with rival runes, their eyes burning amber with conquest's hunger. At their fore loomed Thorn Blackfang, the alpha rival whose name whispered through the passes like a curse, broad as a mountain flank, his furred mane streaked with war paint, scars mapping battles that had claimed Nocthrum's borders. He was no mere raider, betrayal's architect, fed secrets by a traitor in Aric's council, a beta advisor whose ambition festered in the court's undercurrents, exploiting the king's grief to sow discord. Thorn's lips curled in a snarl, revealing fangs yellowed by tundra kills. "The widowed king flees to his goddess's skirts," he growled, voice booming off the crystals like thunder over ice. "Ilara's ghost couldn't save you then. What makes you think this stray Omega will now?" Aric stepped forward, his body coiling with alpha dominance, the mantle of royalty shedding its melancholy for steel. The moonstone at Ilara's throat flared in response, its light weaving protective threads around them, but the warriors advanced. Claws scraping stone, their scents a foul brew of musk and malice. The clash ignited swift and brutal. Auric met Thorn head-on, their bodies slamming together in a frenzy of fangs and fury, blood spraying in arcs that caught the lunar beams like crimson stars. Ilara pressed against the altar, her exile's instincts screaming retreat, but the pendant burned, urging her forward. One warrior lunged at her, jaws wide, and she dodged, her hand instinctively grasping a shard of crystal from the floor, sharp as retribution. She drove it into the beast's flank, twisting with a cry that blended fear and ferocity, hot blood slicking her fingers anew. The wolf yelped, collapsing in a heap, but the act unleashed something primal within her. Not just survival, but the lunar gift's raw edge, channeling Ilara's echo into strikes that felled shadows. Introspection clawed at her amid the chaos. These were not faceless foes, but harbingers of her past's judgment. Blackthorn Pack had rejected her for barrenness, deeming her a weakness in the hierarchy of bloodlines, much as Thorn now saw her as Auric's fatal flaw. As Auric grappled Thorn, rolling across the frost-veined floor, she glimpsed the truth in the rival's taunts. "Your counsel bleeds secrets to me, Nocthram. That sniveling beta, Lord Varen, his whispers of your endless mourning paved our path. You rule a fractured realm, king of ghosts," Auric roared, pinning Thorn against the altar, claws raking deep furrows. But doubt flickered in his eyes, the betrayal's sting reopening wounds deeper than any dart. Ilara intervened, the moonstone surging as she placed her palm on Auric's back, her power flowing like glacial melt, steadying his rage, revealing Varen's face in a flash of vision. The advisor's sly grin in shadowed chambers, trading loyalty for southern gold. The other warrior charged, but Ilara met him with newfound resolve, her touch disarming him, not with violence, but a pulse of lunar serenity that forced his shift back to human form, trembling and exposed. Thorn broke free, bloodied but unbowed, his gaze shifting to Ilara with predatory calculation. "The Omega with the Queen's eyes," he sneered, circling. "Destiny's jest, or the goddess's cruel trick?" The confrontation peaked, Auric and Thorn clashing in a final visceral storm, fists and fangs, the cavern echoing with grunts and the wet tear of flesh. Ilara stood between them, the pendant a blazing sun in the dimness, her voice cutting through. "Enough. Blood for blood chains us all. What is strength, if not choosing mercy over the throne's endless war?" Thorn lunged, but Auric's strike felled him, the rival alpha crumpling with a gurgle, his warriors dragging him into retreat through the tunnels, howls fading into defeated whimpers. Silence returned, heavy with the aftermath, blood pooling on the altar, Auric's chest heaving, his face a mask of ethical torment. He turned to her, the guilt resurfacing, now laced with the weight of exposed treason. "Varen, my own blood's betrayer." I turned inward after Ilara, blind to the rot. "And you? Your gift saved us, but at what cost to your freedom?" Ilara met his gaze, the moonstone cooling against her skin, its light dimming as if sated. Love tugged at her, a redemptive flame in the cold, yet freedom whispered of shadows unclaimed, of an Omega's right to wander unbound. Forgiveness for the Pack's past rejection warred with the urge for war's justice against traitors like Varen. To bind with Auric meant embracing the fragment, healing his realm at the expense of her solitude. To flee preserved her liberty, but doomed the throne she now glimpsed as her own trial. She traced the pendant's chain, blood flaking from her fingers, the cavern's crystals reflecting their weary forms, two souls scarred by loss, poised on destiny's knife edge. The moon above fractured further, casting judgmental light, and in that ethical crucible, Ilara felt the dilemma's spiritual bite. Redemption demanded sacrifice, but whose heart would break first? Auric reached for her, his touch a question, and as the first tremors of pursuit echoed anew, she whispered, "The goddess offers no easy paths, only choices that bleed into rebirth." The sanctum held its breath, the blood on the stone a testament to judgments yet unresolved, binding them in the fire of what must be confronted or forsaken. The sanctum's crystals hummed with the aftermath's fragile truce, their lunar light fracturing across the blood-smeared altar like veins of shattered fate. Ilara stood amid the cooling pools of crimson, her fingers still slick with the remnants of battle, Aryx, the warriors, her own, each drop a testament to the judgments that had led them here. The moonstone pendant rested heavy against her chest, its glow subdued now, a quiet ember that mirrored the weary fire in her veins. The air hung thick with the iron tang of spilled life, undercut by the faint sacred incense that lingered like a ghost's breath. And beyond the cavern's mouth, the wind's low moan carried the retreating howls of the tundra clans, broken but not vanquished. Thorn's defeat was a reprieve, not an end. Varen's betrayal festered deeper, a poison in the throne's roots that demanded excision before it devoured all. Aryk leaned against the obsidian slab, his broad frame etched with fresh scars that wept thin rivulets, joining the older ones from years of border wars and inner grief. His storm-gray eyes, once shadowed by Ilara's absence, now held a clarity forged in the revelation's blaze, a king's melancholy yielding to ethical resolve. He reached for her, not with command, but a raw need that stripped him bare, his calloused palm cupping her bloodied cheek. "The traitor waits in the citadel's heart," he murmured, voice a rumble like distant thunder over the iron spines. "Varen, my advisor, my kin by oath." His whispers invited the clan's blades. "I see it now, through your gift. His ambition, cloaked in loyalty, preying on my silence after Ilara. To confront him means war within our walls, a choice between the crown's iron grip and the mercy that might heal us all." Ilara's breath caught, the pendant warming as if echoing his words, its azure pulse sinking with the cavern's drip, steady, insistent, a heartbeat of destiny. Exile had been her forge, rejection a blade that honed her spirit, but this moment demanded more, to step from shadows into the light, to wield her lunar conduit, not as a curse, but a salve. The fragment of Ilara within her stirred, not as invasion, but harmony, a queen's unspoken regrets blending with her own barren wounds, whispering that strength lay not in heirs or thrones, but in mending what power fractured. She thought of Blackthorn's Alpha, his scornful decree that had banished her, deeming her empty, of the wild's indifferent cold that had nearly claimed her soul. Yet here, in this lunar womb, she glimpsed rebirth, love as redemption's trial, where compassion crowned the fallen and freedom bloomed from sacrifice. The tunnel shuddered, stone groaning as footsteps echoed, Nottram's guards, drawn by the fray, their torches flickering like hesitant stars at the entrance. Aryk straightened, the Alpha's fire reigniting, but his gaze lingered on her, pleading for the union that could anchor him. "You are no ghost, Ilara," he said, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, igniting sparks along her skin that chased away the frost of isolation. "The goddess wove Ilara's light into you because your pain mirrors mine, unworthy in the eyes of packs and crowns, yet unbreakable in the moon's gaze. Join me, not as echo, but as equal. Heal this realm with me, or let me face the rot alone. What is destiny, if not the choice to bind wounds rather than wield them?" Tears traced icy paths down her cheeks, mingling with the blood on her hands, and she felt the ethical precipice give way beneath her. Freedom tempted, the endless veils where no one demanded her barren form yield life, where shadows swallowed her secrets. But in Aryk's touch, she sensed the deeper liberty. To heal, to forgive the past's cruelties, to transform rejection into a force that redeemed kings and omegas alike. The pendant flared once more, its light enveloping them in a cocoon of silver blue, drawing forth visions of what could be, a united Nocthram, borders sealed not by blood, but bonds, Varen's treachery exposed under the full moon's judgment, her gift amplifying Aric's rule into an era of compassionate might. Sacrifice called, her solitude for his wholeness, her hidden power for the pack's survival. Union beckoned, not as reward, but proof, a love born in frost and fire where two broken souls forged a new legacy. With a breath that tasted of pine and resolve, Elira pressed her palm to his chest, over the heart scarred by loss, channeling the lunar essence through their joined blood. Warmth flooded him, easing the fresh wounds, knitting flesh and spirit in a visceral wave that drew a shuddering gasp from his lips. The guards burst in, their eyes widening at the sight. King and Omega, entwined in ethereal glow, the altar's blood steaming as if sanctified. "To the citadel," Aric commanded, voice steady now, laced with redemptive fire. "Summon the council. Varen's deceit ends tonight." But his free hand clasped hers tighter, a silent vow amid the rising clamor. They emerged into the blizzard's embrace, snow whipping like vengeful spirits, the moon fracturing above as if weeping silver tears. Elira walked beside him, no longer exile but catalyst, the pendant's light a beacon piercing the gale. The confrontation awaited, Varen's trial in the throne hall, where mercy might temper justice, and her choice would echo through the ages. In that ascent, rebirth unfolded, rejection's chains shattered, guilt's shadows lifted, their union a quiet revolution under the goddess's watchful eye. Blood and frost yielded to warmth, the wind's howl softening to a sigh, as two destinies converged in the flame of what had been redeemed. The citadel loomed, its spires clawing the storm, and in Elira's heart, the dilemma resolved, not in loss, but in the profound ache of chosen healing. Love, at last, proved its mettle, a crown woven from thorns, blooming eternal in the lunar night. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The blizzard's fury lashed at their forms as they ascended the citadel's winding path, snowflakes slicing like shards of forgotten oaths, each gust a howl that mourned the old world's fracture. Elira's hand remained clasped in Aric's, their blood-mingled grip a tether forged in the sanctum's crimson baptism, the moonstone pendant swaying between them like a captured heartbeat. Its azure glow pierced the whiteout, a defiant lantern against the storm's rage, illuminating the way to judgment. The wind carried the metallic tang of distant forges and the faint, acrid smoke of torches flaring along the battlements, where guards now rallied, their silhouettes etched in firelight like spectral wardens. Nocthram's heart pulsed with anticipation, the betrayal's shadow lengthening under the fractured moon, which hung low and swollen, bleeding silver onto the ice-clad spires. Elira's breath came in sharp, frost-laced bursts, her exile's frailty yielding to the lunar fire that now coursed through her veins. The fragment of Alara thrummed within, not as a haunting specter, but a harmonious echo, amplifying her own hidden strength, the Pathfinder's gift, born from rejection's crucible, to channel the goddess's mercy into truths that severed deceit. She felt Aric's pulse against her palm, steady, yet laced with the tremor of impending sacrifice. To confront Varen meant exposing the rot at the throne's core, risking the pack's fragile unity for the sake of ethical rebirth. Love had bloomed not in stolen glances or fevered embraces, but in this shared ascent, a redemptive trial where tenderness pierced the armor of guilt and solitude. "The moon witnesses all," she whispered, her voice a silken thread woven into the gale. "Let it guide our blade, not to vengeance, but to healing." The throne hall's great doors groaned open under Aric's command, admitting a rush of warmer air, thick with the scent of polished oak and smoldering braziers, their flames leaping like caged spirits. The council assembled in haste, betas and alphas in fur-trimmed robes, their eyes wide with the night's chaos, murmurs rippling like wind through pines. At the dais stood Varen, the traitorous advisor, his lean frame cloaked in silver-embroidered velvet, face a mask of feigned loyalty that cracked under Arik's storm-gray stare. The beta's eyes darted to Ilara, narrowing at the pendant's glow, recognition flickering like a dying ember. "My king," Varen intoned, voice smooth as oiled steel. "The clan's incursion was foreseen. I counseled vigilance." "Lies wither under the moon's gaze," Arik interrupted, his tone a low thunder that silenced the hall. He released Ilara's hand only to draw her forward, positioning her at his side like an equal sentinel. The Alpha's deference a quiet revolution. Blood still flecked their garments, a visceral map of the sanctum's fray, and the assembly leaned in, sense mingling, fear's sour bite, curiosity's sharp edge, and the undercurrent of Arik's pine iron essence now laced with her heather warmth. Ilara felt the weight of their scrutiny, echoes of Blackthorn's rejection crashing anew, the barren Omega, unworthy of fire or fate. Yet the pendant pulsed, urging her to speak, to unveil the gift that rejection had unwittingly honed. She stepped onto the dais, the moonstone flaring brighter, casting lunar fractals across the vaulted ceiling, where tapestries of ancient hunts stirred as if alive. Visions bloomed from her touch on the throne's arm, unbidden revelations spilling forth like blood from a fresh wound. The hall gasped as ethereal threads of light wove around Varen, binding him in place, forcing truths from his lips, clandestine meetings in southern tundras, gold exchanged for maps of Nocthrum's weaknesses, whispers of Arik's grief, twisted into invitations for invasion. "You preyed on my silence," Arik growled, his frame taut with restrained fury, claws half extended, the king's ethical core warring with the beast's call for swift justice. "Ilara's death blinded me, but not to mercy's demand. What plea do you offer, brother of oath?" Varen's composure shattered, his face paling to ash under the glow, knees buckling as the lunar essence stripped his illusions. "Power. The throne needed strength," he stammered, voice cracking like thin ice. "You wallowed in shadows, unfit to lead. The clans promised alliance, not ruin." The council erupted in snarls, but Ilara raised a hand, the pendant's light intensifying, channeling a wave of serene clarity that quelled the rising chaos. Compassion surged through her, not weakness, but the profound choice of her rebirth. To execute Varen would sate vengeance, chaining the realm to cycles of blood. To forgive, tempered by exile, might forge a pact renewed in trust. "Strength is not the fang's strike," she said, her words echoing with the goddess's timbre. Intimate and unyielding, focused on the ache in her chest, the pain of her own past judgments mirrored in this moment. "It is choosing the healer's hand over the warrior's. Banish him to the wilds, as I was banished. Let rejection teach what thrones cannot." Arik's gaze met hers, a storm yielding to dawn, the guilt that had defined his reign dissolving in the warmth of her resolve. He nodded, the decision a shared breath, and commanded the guards to strip Varen of rank, dragging him into the blizzard's maw, exile as mercy's blade, a moral pivot that rippled through the hall like fire through dry tinder. Cheers rose, tentative then fervent, the pack sensing the shift, a king reborn, his melancholy alchemized into purpose, guided by an Omega's quiet power. As the doors sealed against the wind's wail, Arik turned to her fully, his hands framing her face, thumbs tracing the frost on her lashes. "You are my redemption, Ilara," he murmured, voice raw with the night's toll, his lips brushing hers in a kiss born of frost-kissed fire, tender, resisted no longer, a union sealed in blood and lunar grace. The fragment of Ilara faded into harmony, her echo a blessing, not a chain, as Ilara's own soul claimed its place. Healer, equal, the barren vessel now brimming with destiny's quiet might. They stood entwined on the dais, the moon's light streaming through high windows, bathing them in silver as the council knelt in allegiance. Sacrifice had yielded healing. The throne fortified not by war's iron, but compassion's weave. Rejection transmuted into the pack's salvation. Ilara felt the rebirth in her bones, a warmth spreading from the pendant's core, chasing away the wild's eternal chill. Love proved its mettle. Not a reward snatched from fate, but a choice etched in snow and starlight, where two wounded hearts forged eternity under the goddess's watchful gaze. The wind outside softened to a whisper, Weavos distant and subdued, as Nocthram exhaled into a new dawn. Redemption's flame kindled, eternal and unyielding. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.